Many of us think that as we get more students, our businesses just grow linearly. But in reality, what actually happens is there's a lot of student churn. And so you get this new student, lose student hamster wheel where you're constantly going up, but then back down, up, but then back down. New lose, new lose, new lose. And you could actually be stuck in this vicious cycle for quite a long time and find yourself in a plateau where you're not actually building your business. And there are several reasons why this is the case. So we're going to talk about 7 red flags today that are basically keeping you on the new student, lose student hamster wheel. My goal for you today at the end of this video is that you walk away recognizing where the holes are in your business so that you fill them up, so that rather than going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down in your business, you're actually starting to go a little bit more like this, where you're going upwards and you are actually successfully growing the revenue and growing the profit of your business. If you don't know me, I'm Lisa. I am a tutor coach. I help tutors start and scale your businesses. And the reason why I do so is because I built a tutoring business myself. I grew it to a company that made millions, and I eventually successfully exited last year. And so I have walked the talk. I know what it means to focus. I know how important it is to have consistent students in your business, to have returning customers, because returning customers is how you ultimately actually grow your revenue. So if you'd like to hear my advice on how you can grow your business, avoid all the mistakes that I made, which were really painful and took up a lot of time, and shortcut your way to your dream goal, then feel free to subscribe to this channel, because I promise you don't want to make the same mistakes I've made. I've already made them, so you don't need to make them yourself. The first red flag keeping you on this new student, lose student hamster wheel is that you don't even communicate your expectations with a student. So the expectations that you should be communicating are: how often should the student be seeing you? Is it weekly? Is it fortnightly? And what should they do if they can't actually make those sessions? How do they reschedule? How do they cancel? What happens if they actually miss a session? Because in all of those instances, they affect your income. For example, if you have blocked out an hour for a student and that student is constantly canceling on you, then you're not making any money for that hour that you've set aside. That hour could have been better spent possibly teaching another student. And so students sometimes don't know unless you actually enforce expectations. And when I say enforce, it doesn't mean that we need to be like, rah, like this is how things are. You don't need to be authoritative about it. It's more so a matter of sharing with the student or the parent what the standards are at your company, what you expect of them, because they sign on to be with you, and so they have expectations of you as a tutor. But so that you can be the best tutor possible for them and help them grow in their studies, you have expectations for them as well. And I think that's one thing that a lot of tutors don't realize. They're at the beck and call of their students. They just think that, okay, well, if the student cancels on me this week, that's just how it is. But actually, you have control over the situation. You do have some power to say, hey, I've noticed that you're rescheduling quite a lot. Maybe this time isn't working for you so much. I'd really love to figure out what time slot would be consistent for you week after week. Because if you can get your students to be consistent, then that also means that you get consistent income for your business. And consistent income for your business is what eventually helps you scale. And this leads me into my second red flag. And that's that when students don't meet your expectations, you don't have a follow-up process. So it's all well and dandy for you to communicate with your students how often they should show up for tutoring sessions, what to do when they need to reschedule, what to do when they need to cancel or they miss a session. But a lot of tutors, even if they communicate these expectations, they do it only when they start or when they onboard a student. They don't actually then continue to reiterate and reinforce these expectations later on. So for example, you might have said to a student, hey, it's really important that if you're going to cancel a session, you let me know at least 24 hours beforehand, just so that I can slot in a new student if that's the case. But if you have a student who is continuously canceling on you within that 24-hour bracket, you're left with all these sessions that you can't have because it's too late to organize anybody else for those sessions. But the problem here is that so many tutors feel uncomfortable to actually speak out and to say, hey, I'm calling that out. That wasn't okay. I've mentioned to you before that it's really ideal if you let me know 24 hours beforehand. But unfortunately, you told me a little bit too late this time. A lot of tutors just don't feel comfortable doing this. A lot of tutors I find have, and don't get me wrong, I was also like this too. I have that people pleaser side of me, especially way back then, and especially when I didn't really have the communication tools to be able to do this in a sincere but honest and kind way. And so this is actually just going to keep you on that on off hamster wheel if you don't actually communicate again with your student. So the next time you actually see the student, if they are a repeat offender of cancelling last minute, I would just encourage you to have a chat with them at the end of the following session you have with them. So you might just say something like, hey, by the way, I've noticed that you've cancelled pretty last minute when it came to a couple of our last sessions. Just as a friendly reminder, my cancellation policy is that you need to tell me 24 hours beforehand so that I can plan my day or so that I can actually slot in a different student at that time. Now, for the past instances, I just wanted to communicate this with you just so that you're aware, but I also just want to let you know that if this happens again in the future, that I might actually charge for the session because the notice has been too late notice. And that is all you need to say. In most instances, the student will recognize what you've said and they'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot about your cancellation policy. I'll do better next time. I find that in our heads, we actually make out that conversation to be a lot worse than what actually happens in real life. And I want to share the worst case scenario that happens for a lot of people who don't actually reinforce their cancellation policy. If you let a student just constantly cancel on you, eventually they won't have seen you for weeks, and eventually they might not have seen you for months. And I really want to highlight the scenario where if you don't reinforce your cancellation policy, you don't reinforce any other expectations, what happens is that your student starts to become more and more inconsistent over time. And they can become more and more inconsistent because you're letting them basically be inconsistent. Without communicating it, you're actually communicating to them instead that you're okay with them not showing up. And so eventually what happens is that you just end up losing these students because they haven't seen you in weeks or even months. And so if you find that you're on this new student, lose student hamster wheel, then I would say that you're at the seed or ascend stage of your business. So I've created this quiz to help you understand which phase of your business you're in, which stage, and it's called the 7-Figure Tutoring Growth Assessment. If you'd like to take it, it gives you an insight into where you're at in your tutoring business from 0 to 7 figures, and it helps you understand what are the biggest mistakes people typically make during these stages of business and what you actually need to be focusing on instead so that you can leap and up level into the next stage of business. So I invite you to go and do that quiz so that you've got a better 360 view on what you need to be doing at this current stage in business. All right, so let's move on and talk about our next red flag, and that's that you are inconsistent. So my question to you is, how can you expect a student to be consistent if you're not even consistent? So you have to be the role model for your students. You have to operate as the person who actually sets aside that hour every single week and you show up. Because if you don't show up and you're constantly canceling last minute, you're constantly rescheduling, then that shows to them that it is okay for them to also reschedule, that it is also okay for them to cancel. Because you can't have a cancellation policy that says, hey, you can't cancel on me within 24 hours, otherwise I might charge you, if you're also going and doing the same thing. There's a bit of a double standard that's happening there. And if you have that double standard where you're able to cancel last minute, but they can't, that's also going to build resentment against you. And your parents and students are going to have a worse customer experience as a result. Now, I absolutely understand that sometimes reschedules do need to happen, cancellations do need to happen. And that's where sometimes we have a little bit of that leeway and we have a little bit of that flexibility with our students and also with ourselves. But if you can aim for that consistency week after week, it's going to be easy for you to actually move off that lose student, new student hamster wheel, because your students are going to realize that they need to level up to the same standard as you. Now, so far, we've talked a lot about setting expectations and communicating that. Now I want to talk a little bit bit more about your customer experience. So another red flag is that tutors don't focus on a fantastic onboarding student experience. So a lot of tutors just focus on getting the student in through the door. And then once they've got the student, they're just kind of like, oh, amazing, they're locked in. Let me go and focus on marketing so I can get more students. But that initial stage, that onboarding stage of when a student commits to you and they're excited, they can't wait to get started with you, is so crucial, because there's a statistic that says that people's lasting customer experience with your business happens actually within the first 48 hours. So we want to make sure that we elevate that experience as much as we can, because if we can put our best foot forward for them, if we can get them to have an incredible experience from us from the get-go, that's going to be a lasting impression for them for the remainder of their time with you. Now, you can do whatever you want that feels good to you in terms of how you can create a great onboarding experience. But at minimum, what I want you to do is first, once you've actually signed them on, send them an email. Send them an onboarding email that showcases to them how excited you are that they're going to be a student of yours. Talk to them about what they can expect, right? Like that's what we talked about earlier on in this video. Now leverage that, communicate that in your onboarding email. Hey, I'm so excited to have you as a student. I can't wait to get started with you on X date at this time. By the way, here are some additional things that is really going to help set us up for success. Here's how you reschedule. Here's what happens if you miss sessions. Here's what you can do if you need to cancel a session. Here's some common FAQs students have about tutoring. Make sure you give them all the details they need so that they're set up for that first lesson. So even things like your phone number, making sure that they're able to communicate with you, communicating with them how you want them to communicate with you. Is it through text message? Is it through phone call? Is it through email? Is it through WhatsApp? Is it through Instagram? Like, how do you like to do things? Set the standard for them. And as a bonus, if you wanted to, if you have some sort of free resource, maybe a lesson plan, or maybe you have a guide or anything like that you can throw in for free just so that they can really absorb your teaching from the get-go and it bridges that gap between now and their first lesson, then do that. Like that is of no cost to you, but it's going to give your customers a really incredible first experience with you. So speaking of the customer experience, we've talked a lot about students when they start with you. Let's talk about the ongoing experience with you. So the next red flag that keeps you on that new student, lose student hamster wheel is that you don't ask for feedback. I think a lot of tutors, and myself included, we undermine how often we actually need to ask for feedback. Yes, you might have asked it after your first session. Hey, how was that? Did you like it? Awesome, you're coming back. Nice. And then you might ask them for feedback maybe once they actually wrap up tutoring with you, maybe once they graduate or the school year finishes and they move on to something else. But in between, it's so important that we continue to ask for feedback because this is truly an iterative process. Now, it might not be the most realistic thing in the world to think that every single lesson needs to be better than the last one. But if you can get 1% better for each student every time you see them, then why wouldn't you take that option? So I think the way that you ask for feedback is also really crucial. Rather than asking them, and I'm guilty of this, hey, is there anything I can improve on? Ask them instead, can you tell me one thing I can improve on for next time? So the difference between the two is there anything I can improve on? Means that there's the option to say, oh, no, that was pretty good. Like you're not actually getting your students to think about the answer. Whereas when you assume on this side that there was something that you can improve on, when you ask the question, can you tell me one thing I can improve on? That means that there may be multiple things that you can improve on, but you just want them to pick out one. And so the slight switch in the phrasing will actually elicit a response from your students, which is really powerful feedback for you to be an even better tutor for them so they don't go running off to another tutor and they quit. Let me give you another example. Instead of asking, how was that session? Ask them, what's your favorite part about this session? So the difference here is how was that? Just kind of gets a generalized, vague, oh yeah, it was good. Or, I mean, most of the time they're not even going to tell you that's bad. They just be like, yeah, it's fine. Instead of that, if you say, what was your favorite part about this session? Then it actually helps your student pinpoint what their favorite part about the session was. And on the flip side, you could ask them, hey, can I ask you if there was a part of this session that you feel wasn't most helpful for you? When you get really specific about the feedback you want, you get specific feedback. If you ask vague questions, you get vague responses. So that's the customer experience. Now let's talk about your business overall. So the next red flag is that you only focus on getting more students. So as you can see throughout this video, there are already so many red flags that you could potentially be working on. But so many people skip all of these different elements because they're just too focused on marketing and just trying to get their next student. There's no point getting a new student if you're just going to have a student that you're going to lose as a result. It is a fact that the cost to acquire a customer actually is more than the cost to retain a customer. So if you work on those different elements in your business, setting expectations, making sure you have incredible onboarding experience, making sure that you're asking for feedback, those things actually cost you less time and money than you getting out there and working hard to get new students. So with that in mind, it's so clear that the low-hanging fruit here is actually focusing on the existing students you have, focusing on refining the process with your current students so that you can retain them. And with retention comes more profit and revenue. It's definitely a balancing act between the two of retaining students and also getting new students. And maybe focusing on retention is not as sexy as being able to say, oh, yes, I got a new student, and like the dopamine of doing so. But I promise you, if you work on and focus on the retention element, you're going to be able to scale your business to the next phase of your tutoring business. And so this leads me into my next red flag, and it's that you don't review your systems. If I'm to ask you, when do your students drop off most? Is it after the first lesson? Is it after the 5th lesson, the 10th lesson? And why do they drop off? Can you actually answer me? It may be, I would think that in most situations, and again, I'm super guilty of this as well, you probably lose students majority of the time after that first lesson, but you might not necessarily understand why. And so what we need to do is we need to start getting clarity over your business so that with clarity, you actually have a clear strategy on how to fix those elements of your business that are currently letting you down. So I'll share with you what we did at Lisa Study Guides in order to figure out our drop-off rate and to really clean up our systems. So we understood that after the first lesson, this is where majority of our drop-off rates happened. And we realized that it's because that a lot of these students didn't feel like they got matched up to the right tutor. So what we did is we got a lot better at actually figuring out how do we match the right students and the right tutors together. And we created an entire process that was like a checklist of, okay, this student needs this, 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 which tutors have this, this, this. And by actually doing so, we were able to fix up our retention rate and improve that by 60%, which is huge. And so for you, what are some systems you could potentially implement in your business? So another good example is implement surveys at the end of each term or each semester. Actually get not just verbal feedback, like what we talked about earlier in this video from your students, where you ask them, what was the most helpful part of this session? But actually getting it written down on paper. Because when you get written responses, you're also going to give them time to go away and think about it. And you can also make those surveys anonymous as well, so that you can actually get some real quality data that's not going to be limited by the fact that the student feels like you might actually get that information. So they're too scared to tell you the truth. If you find that you're constantly getting new students but losing them, and it's because you're not communicating things, is it because you don't even have a terms and conditions written down? Is it because you don't have an information pack to communicate with your students or parents, hey, this is how we do things. If you come and join us at Lisa Study Guides, we only accept weekly students, and we love looking after weekly students, but this is what you commit to. You're committing to having weekly sessions with us. And so again, if you find that you're unsure of what systems you need to be implementing in your business, then I encourage you to go and do the quiz, the 7-Figure Tutoring Growth Assessment that I've created, because I really wanted to make sure and give you clarity on, okay, this is where I'm at in business right now. And this is what I need to be focusing on. These are the systems that I should be implementing in my business so that I can fix the problems that I'm currently experiencing and move on to the next chapter of my tutoring business. This is really great for you if you're currently feeling stuck, if you're currently feeling unsure of what that next step is, or if you feel like you're constantly making the mistakes and you're just going around in circles. All right, tutor bosses, those are the 7 red flags I have for you. I felt like this video was filmed in a really seamless way for me because I'm really passionate about this part of business, about the systemized part of business, the behind the scenes that people don't really talk about. And I think that a lot of coaches out there, a lot of videos are all about how do you grow? How do you get more students? How do you go from 0 to making 6 figures in like 30 days? Like that all sounds well and dandy, but it's this stuff. It's the stuff that's not glamorous. It's the stuff that happens behind the scenes that's actually going to take you to that next level. And so if you enjoyed this video, I'm going to ask you a very specific question so that you can give me a specific piece of feedback. And that's, what's the takeaway from this video that you're now going to implement in your business? I would absolutely love to hear it because hearing your feedback is what gives me indication of what I need to be focusing on in the future as well. Now, if you liked this video, then I have a really good feeling that you're going to like my previous video, A Blueprint to Becoming a Booked Out Tutor. So I talk a lot about the same concepts that we talked about here, but from a different angle and with a different lens. So if you feel like retention and consistency is something that you need to work on, then I highly encourage you to go watch that video because I know it's going to be fruitful for you. All right, tutor bosses, so good to see you today, and I will talk to you soon. Mwah. Bye.